Tonight we're on week 2. Can y'all say week 2? Week 2. Do you guys know what this sermon series is called? Face to Face with Jesus. So in this series, our goal is to teach you guys different moments in the Bible where people came face to face with Jesus, but more importantly, where we share our own personal encounters. Because a lot of the time we read the Bible and we're like, oh, that just happened then. That's not going to happen to me. But how many people in this room have had an encounter with Jesus? Who have felt the Holy Spirit? Okay? My goal for the end of this night is that every single one of you are going to raise your hand. Okay? That every one of you will feel the Holy Spirit's presence, that you will have your own personal encounter with God. All right, so last week, Tanner brought us a great message about doubting Thomas. Who remembers what that story was about? Tanner, you can't tell me. What people that are not leaders remember what that story was about? All right, tell me, what was it about? Yeah, tell me. Don't laugh, say it loud. Come on. That part. He had his own real encounter with God. There are people in this room sitting next to you that have never had an encounter with God, and truly they don't believe in God. And that's okay, because sometimes we need to have our own experience to believe. You can't live off your parents' faith. You can't live off your neighbor's faith. You have to have your own, and you have to know Jesus on your own terms. All right, y'all, so I want you guys to open up your Bibles. If you don't have your Bibles, still keep your phone tucked away. But we're going to open up to Mark 5:24 through 34. So while you guys open up to this part of the Bible is when Jesus is walking through the city, and there's crowds of people that are following him everywhere because they've heard of all the miracles that he's done. Can you imagine what the streets felt like in that moment? When you've heard of all the amazing things that Jesus has done, you all just want to be a part of it, right? Who would want to be a part of it? I would. I would not miss that moment. All right, so for 1 second, I want all of you to close your eyes. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you do anything weird. Just close your eyes. All right, I want you to imagine a woman who walks around with her head down. Her shoulders are slumped. She probably has her head and her whole body covered because she wants to be hidden and doesn't want a single person to see her. I want you to imagine her feeling nervous and scared, but not just to see Jesus, but just because she's walking through the room. She's probably trembling in fear. Can you imagine that feeling? She was already considered and labeled as unclean, and for 12 years, she'd lived her life without other people. She wasn't allowed to be in the presence of other people. Can you imagine the isolation and the trauma and pain that felt like? All right, I want you guys to think about putting yourself in those shoes and what that feels like to yourself. Some of you may be already feeling that sitting in the seat as I explain those emotions. All right, y'all can open your eyes. Okay, so Mark 5:24 through 34 says, a large crowd followed and pressed around Jesus. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Most of you guys should know this story. JD preached about it not too long ago. We're going to give just a slightly different perspective because we're going to give it through her eyes opposed to the people who witnessed this miracle. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Can you guys imagine that? Spending 12 years of your life going to doctor after doctor after doctor, and no one can give you an answer. All they can say is, you need to go stay over here by yourself. You're too unclean to be here. I can't heal you and I can't help you. You can go stay over here. Can you imagine that? That would be terrible. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. Because she thought, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. Can you imagine that feeling? Everybody who stood up at this altar today, whatever thing that you're carrying, even if you didn't come up to the altar, whatever you're carrying right now sitting here, can you imagine Jesus being just an arm's length away from you? Would you reach out and touch it? Or would you stand back like at the beginning of worship? Would you reach out and touch it? Or would you be too afraid to even raise your hand for worship? I'm not condemning you. This is a real moment of self-reflection. I want you to think about it. What would you do in that moment? Immediately, her bleeding stopped. Because she thought, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Immediately, she literally touched the bottom of his clothes. That's like touching the hem of someone's pants, and she was fully healed from 12 years of suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power that had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask us who touched me?" Basically, his disciples were like, "You're tripping. There's no way we're going to be able to tell you who just touched you." But Jesus kept looking around because he knew he was going to find out who it was. The woman, knowing what had happened to her, she came and fell to his feet, trembling in fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Y'all, can you imagine how scary that was for her? 12 years of suffering. Some of y'all are barely 12 years old. Like, that's your entire life. Let's be real right now. I was also thinking about it. Can you imagine the faces of all the people in the crowd? They were probably like, what just happened? How did she even think she could come here? She's not worthy to be here, right? How many of y'all don't feel worthy of a touch from Christ, right? Right now, I think of some of you in this room, like I said, who carry that same shame, who carry that weight. Whether it's the shame of what you were watching last night when no one was around you. Or some of y'all I follow on Snapchat, some of the things that y'all are posting on Snapchat. Some of y'all might carry the shame of what you said behind your friend's back today because you were frustrated instead of talking to them to their face. But some of you might also be carrying shame of maybe not having a great relationship with your parents, or being abandoned by a parent even, or feeling unworthy compared to another sibling of yours or something like that. There are a lot of things that people in this room are carrying. And every single one of you, I guarantee, is carrying something. And if you say that you're not, then I guarantee you need to have a moment of truth with yourself and with Jesus. So I have a real question for you guys. What is the longest you've ever prayed for something? Have you prayed for a week? Who's prayed for a week for something? Every day for a week, you've prayed for something to happen in your life. What about for a month? Keep your hand raised if you've prayed for a whole month every day. What about for a year? 2 years? 5 years? 10 years? 12 years? Some of my OGs in here, they know what it's like, right? We've been through it, right? We've been through it. All right, so today I'm here to talk to you about what my personal journey was of praying for something for 12 years. Some of you who know me know what this story is about to be. Some of you are going to have no clue. And honestly, when JD asked me to preach, I was like, this is the one thing I'm not preaching about. This isn't it. Everyone knows about it, and I'm not preaching about it. And then I remembered there are people in this room who don't know me, who don't know my testimony or my family's testimony, because really it's my family's testimony. So, I have a daughter. Her name is Tristan. When I was 5 months, I'm going to tell this as quickly and short as I can. When I was 5 months pregnant with Tristan, I found out that she had a birth defect. Her intestines were literally on the outside of her body, inside of my belly. We didn't think it would be that major, but when she was born, they had to remove all of her small intestines. So basically, how she digests food, how she absorbs nutrients, all the things. We thought she'd be in the hospital for about a month, and then we would be good. She'd live a normal life. Until day 2, after her operation, they told us that she would never live to see the age of 4. They told us she would never get to leave the hospital, and she would never live a normal life. Y'all, I was not going to stand for that. I didn't know Jesus for real, but that was not about to be an option in my house. So over the last 12 years, we have prayed and prayed and prayed. We've grown desperate. We've grown weary. We were tired. It was not fun. But what we didn't do was give up our faith that Jesus was going to heal her. And now that I think of it, Fraha, thank you for sharing your testimony. Where are you? Thank you. Because you just reminded me of the day I found out about Tristan's birth defect, I went back to work, and a woman in a bathroom, to this day, I have no clue who she is. I never could find her after this moment. But a woman in the bathroom stopped me and asked if she could pray for me. And because that woman had 20 seconds of supernatural faith, and she chose to pray for me. That weekend, I decided to come here to City Center Church. Yeah. I truly believe that it was an angel that God sent to me in that moment because he knew that the trajectory of my life would look a lot different if I didn't have Jesus in it. Okay, so my prayer, like I said, is that when we leave here tonight, that all of you feel encouraged, that your faith walk is stronger, and that whatever current storm that you're walking through, your faith is strengthened, and the future that you know how to lean beyond your understanding instead of, like Faraha said, we don't lean on our own understanding, we lean on Christ. Okay, so here are a few things that I learned throughout a 12-year span of praying for healing for my child. 1, isolation is intentional. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about I'm depressed and I'm going to go hide in my room and I'm going to not talk to anybody. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those seasons of life when God is challenging you to grow and to be a better person. And he puts you in a room by yourself and you feel like nobody's there for you. Sometimes you feel like you don't even hear God, but he's there and he's working through every one of those seasons. I'm talking about seasons of isolation where God is pruning and growing you in ways that you didn't even know that you needed to grow in. Maybe even when he asks you to step away from your friend group because they're distracting you from God or taking you down a path that you're not meant to be around. How many of you have been asked by God to step away from a friend before? Y'all, that is one of the hardest things to do ever. Even as an adult, that's happened to me, and that was probably one of the hardest journeys that I've ever walked out. Still, I have hurt from some of those things. Also, it can also be a situation where God asks you to walk away from a friend group because you're leaning more on their opinion on how you should handle situations instead of what God wants you to do. That was my problem. Mine was I would be grumpy and complaining and I would call my friend instead of getting on my face in my prayer closet and asking God what I should do about it. Again, I just want to remind you, if you're stuck in a season of isolation, it's not fun. It literally flat out sucks. But God didn't call us to be comfortable. He called you to be set apart of the world, and sometimes that's going to take a lot of growing pains. So one of the biggest ways, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking of our whole journey, and it's a lot, y'all. I could literally write a book about our entire journey. But one of the first things that I thought of was 7 years ago, actually, Facebook memories always be getting me. 7 years ago to this day, we were supposed to be leaving for a wish trip. So those of you who have ever seen a wish trip where they send you to somewhere amazing because you have a sick kid, we actually were granted a wish trip. And Tristan chose to go to Disney World. And so I think Josie might have a picture of it. We chose to go to Disney World. The day we were supposed to leave, Tristan spiked a fever, and we had to be admitted to the hospital. We had to cancel the trip. We'd been planning for months and months and months. As you can see, we did get to go on the trip later. But as much as that was not fun, because we didn't go to that, I was able to go to Brilliance Ignite, which is actually happening this weekend. Yep, little plug. But I was able to go to Brilliance Ignite, and that was one of the biggest moments that changed the trajectory of how I prayed for my child. We sat in the middle of a service, and God gave me a vision of Tristan healed at like a middle school age. Like I very clearly remember that it was a promise that she would be healed when she was in middle school. And he told me, walk strong in your faith, she is healed. He even gave me a Bible verse, which isn't even actually related to healing, but it's more about standing your ground and continuing to do God's work. So he gave me the Bible verse, Hebrews 10, 35 through 36. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. That was the first promise he gave me when it came to this situation. On that day, I had a face-to-face encounter with God. And with one touch of faith, I was changed. A couple years later, we had a revival at the church, and I remember most of my family couldn't be there, but me and Tristan were there, and we were sitting in a service, and Tristan was like, Mom, I'm going to go serve in City Kids and see if they need help. So I was like, all right, bet, go for it. 2 seconds after that, the pastor was like, we're going to have a prayer for healing. Anyone who needs prayer, I want you to come up to the altar. And I remember in that moment, I was like, dang it, she just walked out of the room. Really, God? Like, we've been waiting waiting for this. You're going to pray for healing when she leaves? And in that moment, God said, don't worry about it. She's covered. And he gave me a vision of my family standing at the front of the church with our entire church body's arms reached out, because he knew that we were covered by the body of Christ in our church and that they were already praying for her. And the crazy thing is, a couple years later, this happened. This is my family standing on stage, and the entire church body was praying for her healing. But this moment wasn't to strengthen my faith, because I already had my encounter with God. But this was to strengthen my husband. In that, there were 2 services that day. We went through the first service, and after the first service, my husband was physically shaking. And if you know my husband, he's real quiet about his relationship with God. Most of it's pretty private. He don't share too much about it. But he was physically shaking, and he was like, I think we need to stay for this second service. And I was like, all right, let's do it. Normally, I'm always the one that lives at the church, so I didn't care. I was like, bet, let's go. So we stayed for the second service, and in the middle of it, he asked everyone to come up for prayer. We weren't going to go, but one of the pastors was like, I think you guys need to go up here. The Bible verse about the guy who his friends carried him up through the house, through the roof, so that they could be prayed for healing, that's what happened to us. And we stood on that stage, and our entire family fell out as a unit onto the floor. Y'all, my husband is terrified of those moments. He don't even like to raise his hand in worship because it terrifies him. So that was totally supernatural. But in that moment, my husband had a one-on-one encounter with God. He was face-to-face with God, and he needed that so that he would have the perseverance to fight through this 12-year-long battle that we didn't know would last as long as it did. So the next point I want to tell you about is your prayer life matters. Like I said earlier, your faith can't rely on your mom's, but your prayer life cannot be based off of what your mom prays for you, what your dad prays for you, what your church aunties pray for you, or even your grandma. That's amazing if you have people who have been praying for you your whole life. I didn't have that luxury, but a lot of people in this room have prayer warriors that go after every battle for you. But you right now are of an age that you should have your own prayer life. How many of you guys have a consistent prayer life with God? Not just on Wednesdays when you show up to 180, and not just on Sundays when your parents drag you out of bed. Okay? My goal after tonight is that your hands, or more hands, will be raised to that question. That every one of you will have a consistent prayer life with God. When you're struggling, you don't bring it to your friend. You don't cry in the corner. You don't allow Satan to lie to you, but instead you go straight to the feet of Jesus and you have your own one-on-one encounter with God. So I talked about when I had my encounter with God, when my husband had his encounter with God. Now at this point, Tristan was in middle school, 6th grade year. We have a revival. And Pastor Cody's message was, yes, this right here. Pastor Cody's whole thing was that miracles still happen. Some of you might have actually been to that revival, some of you in this room. And Tristan was like, Mom, I've been talking to Pastor Michelle about it. I'm praying that I'm going to be healed. I'm going to be healed at this revival. Now it's affecting her faith. She knows now that God can heal her, that it doesn't rely on what I think or what her dad thinks, but that she, as a 11-year-old girl at the time, knew that God could heal her. In that revival, she prayed and she prayed, and she came to me at the end of the night and she said, Mom, I think God talked to me. And I was like, okay, what do you think he said? And she said, he told me I'm not meant to be healed yet. Can you imagine that? As an 11-year-old saying, God told me you are not meant to be healed yet. But then the next statement is what changed it. She said, more people are meant to see my healing. Wild, right? She wasn't upset about it. She wasn't angry about it. But we were like, okay, Jesus, let's do it. Let's see what we can do. Number 3 is your fight is attached to somebody else's freedom. Imagine how many people have read about the woman with the issue of blood. If you go to our church just in the last month, I'm pretty sure it's been preached about at least 3 times from multiple platforms. But imagine how many people have increased their faith because of this one woman's story. This one unnamed woman. She don't even have a name in the Bible. She's just the issue that she had. I take that back until God or Jesus called her his daughter. She is a daughter of Christ. But my thought is, can you imagine her in heaven every time someone reads that verse and when their faith grows, how she feels? Can you imagine what it would feel like if as you are fighting your battle, somebody next to you, their faith is growing because they see how you respond to it? How they see that you get on your face in front of Christ instead of backing down or crying in the corner? It's okay to cry in the corner. I've done it many times. But do it to Jesus. Do it at the feet of Jesus. So I just want to tell you, as you walk through your current trial, God has a purpose, and you are meant to be on this journey. No matter how ugly it is, no matter how hard it is, he has called you to whatever journey you're on. And it's going to look completely different than the person sitting next to you or the person on the other side of the room. God opened doors to put her in front of so many people. He used her, to put Tristan in front of many people. He used her for campaigns for Children's Mercy. He put her face on a billboard. So he told her, no, you can't be healed. More people are supposed to see your healing. This is what he did. If you go to any Children's Mercy campus, there is a book on the wall that has her face on it. Many of your moms have sent me the picture when you've been in the emergency room or an urgent care clinic. He also put her on a platform where she raised millions of dollars for the Red Gala for Children's Mercy by sharing her testimony. I think we might have a picture of our family from that as well. So again, your thing that you're fighting right now, the journey that you're on, is not about you. I love you, but it's not. I know it hurts. I know it sucks. I know you want to feel bad for yourself, but it's not about you. It's about the person next to you. It's about the person in your school who doesn't have hope and is struggling and is carrying bondage and chains. It's about those people, because when they see you walk out in freedom, that's how they get their freedom, guys. And I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to risk not showing people that. I'm not willing to get up to heaven and be like, see that person? You were supposed to witness to them, but you were too busy on your phone. You were too busy having a bad attitude because the person messed up your food in the drive-thru. Right? Right? Like, can you imagine sitting at the feet of Jesus, going to heaven, and he recalls your entire life, and he's like, look at this. And we all have those moments. Again, I'm not perfect, y'all. I'm a hot mess, literally. I'm not always nice. I can be really grumpy. I've sinned many, many times in my life. But you always try to do your best. You always try to show up. But most importantly, you have to give it all to God and allow him to work through you in the things that you have going on. So we went through my encounter with Jesus, my husband's, my daughter's. And this is where things started to change. 2 years ago, we went to summer camp, and it was the first year Tristan was able to go to youth camp. Some of you in this room were at that camp. And we had a moment at the camp where, again, we prayed for healing. There were a couple people we prayed for. Tristan was one of them. So our whole youth group was there. They've witnessed her being in and out of the hospital. Y'all, I didn't mention this. For years of her life, we didn't just spend random days in the hospital. We would spend months in the hospital. I think when she was in 3rd grade, we were in the hospital every month for 2 weeks at a time. That meant we were away from our family. I didn't get to see my sons except for when we'd randomly switch places. I barely got to see my husband. Tristan missed school for the majority of her elementary age. So, our lives were put on hold. Anytime she spiked a fever, we'd be in the hospital for 2 weeks. But you know what we did? We still showed up for church. I still went to Bible study every Thursday. Not to say I went to Bible study, but because, y'all, I needed Jesus. I would have lost my mind if I didn't have Jesus, literally. Okay, but back to it. 2 years ago, we were at this camp. We all prayed over Tristan. We prayed over a couple of other things. And I don't know if this person remembers this, but Bree gave us a word of encouragement that God had spoke to her to tell me to remember the promise that God had given me. And in this season of life, we were very discouraged. We were so close to getting Tristan healthy, and every time she would get sick again, and it was just a spiral, always. We just couldn't get past this thing. And she reminded me to go back and look at the things God promised me. Y'all, this is why it's important to have a paper Bible, okay? The first thing I did was open my Bible, and it went to Hebrews 10, 35 through 36. The Bible verse that God gave me at Brilliance 7 years ago when we canceled our Disney trip and I was able to get my first real one-on-one encounter with God. That's why it's important to have a paper Bible. You can write in it, you can highlight it. God's not going to get mad at you. Also, I've been preaching this to my 7th grade girls. I love y'all, and I know that you guys are all about technology, but get a paper journal. When I went to go I almost brought my stack of journals, y'all, but it would have been like this, trying to carry them. As soon as I went to go write this message and I was reminded of that promise, I went and found my notebooks. The very first page I opened to was my notes from Brilliance of that year in that exact Bible verse. That is how God works, y'all. That is how he works. So we went to church camp. We prayed over Tristan. The very next week, we had to drive to Omaha to go to a doctor's appointment, and the doctors, by surprise, told us she could have her lines removed. So Tristan has had central lines, which are permanent IVs, and feeding tubes and all the things. On that day, after we prayed, and God reminded me of his promise, she was able to get her line removed. Y'all, we never, ever thought this was going to happen. And those of you who know her, Tristan's last time of being in the hospital was a year and a half ago. You can applaud. Tristan has never made it out of the hospital for more than 3 months at a time. So y'all, that's huge. She's been line free for over 2 years now. But the funny thing is, I told you about all these conferences we went to and revivals and all these things, and you walk up and you expect a healing, right? You're like, man, today's the day. I'm going to get healed. It's going to be supernatural and everyone's going to see it. It's going to be amazing. No, that's not always what it looks like. Ours was, we went to Omaha one day. She had surgery. That surgery was exactly what she needed to heal her body. God put us in front of the perfect doctors to perform what she needed so that she could be healed. So that she could go to high school without having tubes, without looking like she was 9 months pregnant because her belly would get so big. I spared her some of the pictures of the things that she's gone through. I was going to show some, but it doesn't even matter. But I can't even tell you how bad some of them are, the things that she's had to walk through. But again, God put us through it not for ourselves, not for our glory, because we are a hot mess, like I said, but because God did it. He's the one who healed her, and he can heal every single one of you from whatever it is that you're needing healed from. So earlier, I had you guys close your eyes, and I had you guys think about the woman with the issue of blood. After I went through and put together this message, for one, I found freedom from writing this message. I just told my husband last week that I've struggled really bad for a while now of not knowing how to function because I've lived my life in survival mode for so many years. Every second, I'd have to drop my life down and go live in the hospital. Every second, I'd have to stop doing this and give my life to something else. And so I found my own freedom just in writing this and being reminded of the promises of God, of being reminded of what it is that he can do through us. But now I want you guys to think of this woman, and I want you to think of how she went from being shamed, unclean, damaged, to walking in kingdom confidence in her faith-filled purpose. When I think of this story now, it doesn't actually tell you that her shoulders are down. It doesn't tell you that she's walking in shame, does it? It just says that she walked up and touched the back of his cloak. So now, how I view her is she's prayed for 12 years. How I see her life is over 12 years, she had her own one-on-one encounters with God. She had her own moments where God sent people to her to remind her of what it is that God's promises were. She had situations where she was in the wilderness and she was reminded of what God could do. And in that moment, instead of being shamed with her shoulders down, she was walking with a holy confidence. She was intentional. She knew that all she had was one shot. She needed 20 seconds of supernatural courage and faith to touch the back of his clothes to change the trajectory of her life forever, but also to change the trajectory of y'all's lives so that you could read in the Bible that God will heal you from one step of faith. So my question is, are you willing to take one step of faith for freedom, to get out of the shame, one step of faith to stop walking in pride and thinking you're better than people, one step of faith so that you can have physical or emotional healing? I can't tell you how many weeks I've stood at this altar and prayed for mental healing for children in this room, that you guys won't struggle with anxiety or depression or not feeling good enough. Y'all, this is how it happens. You reach out and you touch the cloak of Jesus, and you get on your face and you ask him to heal you of those things. You guys don't need me to pray for you, although I will always pray for you. But you don't need me. You don't need a service. You don't need a revival or a big conference. You don't need the fancy lights. You can go home tonight and get on your face, and Jesus will heal you from anything that you're struggling with. The chains that you're carrying, the weight that you're carrying will be relieved. God will lift them up off your shoulders and say, daughter, because of your faith, you are healed. Now go walk in peace. Who wants to walk in peace today? Sorry. So one thing that I know that this journey is very hard. Asking for healing is hard. But we had to position ourselves in front of the right people. We had to surrender our lives to God, and we could not try to control the situation ourselves, because that's a burden, y'all. The things that you're carrying are a burden. But my question is, are you in a position to receive your miracle? You will have what your faith expects. So if you don't expect anything to happen, then nothing is going to happen. If we have worship services and you stand here like this, nothing is going to happen. I mean, you guys can just show up to play 9 Square, but I got other things to do than play 9 Square, right? So my question is, are you going to step forward instead of being timid? Are you going to step out in your faith? Do you actually believe that God can heal you? Whether it's a physical healing or a struggle with anger issues or depression, again, like I said, being abandoned by a parent or a loved one, do you think that God can heal you from that? Or do you think that the healing is only for the person next to you? Some of you I know probably feel that way. But I'm here to remind you that it's for you. It's for every single one of you. So I ask you, get into position. This woman had to position herself for what God had promised her. She didn't show up by accident. She intentionally showed up on that day, at that moment, to receive her healing. She had a plan, and she was not leaving without that promise being met. We tend to want an instant sign or blessing or healing, but God needs us to build our faith first. So the situation you're in right now is building your faith for the next thing. The more that he gives you, the more he's going to ask of you. So keep building your faith. Keep being good stewards of the things that he's given you. She built her faith over 12 years, just like my family did. Remember, the wilderness is a necessary stop on your way to the promised land. There is a purpose, a divine plan. He humbles us and tests us. If we seek only the promise and not the promiser himself, we will not have the strength through the wilderness. And some of you are currently walking through that wilderness. A reminder, sometimes it just takes 20 seconds of insane faith to change the rest of your life. Yeah. So I encourage you to surrender it to him, because the God inside of you is greater than the mountain in front of you. If you're here today and you need a healing, if you need your own touch with God, I challenge you right now to make a faith statement. What is it that you're asking for? Be very specific. Write it down when you go home. Tell your small group leader if we stop in, even if we don't have groups, go tell your small group leader so they can stand in agreement with you. Go home and tell your parents. If your parents aren't believers, find somebody else to tell. Or just speak it out to Jesus, because that's really all that matters. Because a reminder, your faith heals you. Thanks, guys.